10:15, and we're going to call the meeting to order. Roll call. Lee Warren.
Here.
Brad Phillips.
Here.
Sean Emmerich.
Here.
Steve Reinhardt.
Here.
Joel Williamson. And nobody's on the phone yet. I can't see who's on there.
This is Brenda Roebuck.
Just bring the robot. Or
Well,
not.
that's using the computer.
Oh, okay. Can you check Tony's in?
Hello, is anyone on the phone?
And was the commissioner going to call?
I emailed him and let him know.
Okay.
So
Just
uh,
if they do, you'll let us know when they come
yes.
in. Okay. And then.
Oh, hello, is someone on the phone?
Tony, just Brenda Roebuck.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Oldmixon has joined us. And then I'll let staff introduce themselves, starting with Kristen.
Kristen Moorman, Deputy General Counsel.
Michael Malloy, Staff Attorney.
Mark Moore, Standards and Enforcement Services.
Denise Sample, Licensing Manager.
Tony Slagle, Government Affairs.
And there's no other visitors that I need to.
No, there was a possibility. Oh, yes. Hi. I'm sorry, Kay. Do you want to
Hi, I'm
introduce yourself?
Kay Rissick. I'm with the Sunset Commission.
Hi, thank you for joining us. Okay, so we have a full house today. So move on. Agenda item 2, ratification of the minutes of February 26, 2018. Did everybody get a chance to go over the minutes? Were there any changes or? Okay. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
Motion approved, Mike. Second.
All right, motion to accept the minutes is approved. Agenda item 3, general comments from visitors on non-agenda items. Does anybody in our gallery have anything? Okay. All righty. Agenda item 4, reports from subcommittees, standards of practice, which is Doyle.
Spoke to
Dr. Evans is on the phone.
Dr. Evans, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. I can hear you.
Okay, welcome. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, Doyle.
I spoke to Tony about the meeting before. We had canceled it. We decided to cancel it this time until I could put together more of an idea of the topics we're going to cover, as opposed to just shotgun blast to the whole thing. We want to break it down into the structural mechanical sections, safety issues, and distill down which of the deficiencies we want to consider deficient or just identifications. So I'm going to put that together for Tony. We'll discuss it, and then we'll set a meeting to address specific items within the standards of practice as opposed to doing it kind of blind like we were doing.
Okay.
Can you include Aaron Heitman's comments? Aaron Heitman, sent those comments in? Because he had a whole PDF list of people I included in that.
Yeah, we'll do.
Wait,
Enforcement.
do you know, did Mr. Heitman forward those to staff?
Don't know.
I don't think so. He sent them to me specifically, and then I forwarded them to the Standards of Practice Subcommittee. But what I can do is forward them to staff so that you guys can have them as meeting materials for the subcommittee meeting. I'm sorry.
That would be great, thank you.
Case. John's letter.
the last two? I've got
And then the Enforcement Subcommittee.
We did not meet. So we're meeting to report.
Okay. And Education Subcommittee.
We had no.
Nothing new on education.
Just as a footnote, for the standards, everybody obviously involved is concerned about the standards, but just in case you haven't heard, we're about to go through another review of the standards of practice. So if there are things, comments, suggestions, additions, subtractions that you would like to suggest for that, please submit them soon so that we can start the discussions for those.
And Kristen, just as a, or Tony, just as a kind of a refresher for me, before when an agenda, before an agenda is completed and before a meeting, what is the time frame for materials to be submitted, to be included in that meeting to be discussed during an agenda?
Do you want to speak to that? Or?
Can it be like day of, night before, last minute? Because we seem to be getting a lot of that.
No, the meetings of the inspector committee are open meetings, so they're subject to the Texas Open Meetings Act, which means there's a posting requirement and the materials are due before we post that meeting with the register, so that we can get the materials and the agenda posted and sent out to all of the committee members, so y'all will have time to consider all of that material before you meet. To the extent that comments come in during that interim time period between the time the meeting materials are posted and the meeting date, it's at the discretion of the committee as to whether or not you want to consider those. We discourage people from sending or submitting last minute comments or materials, even in the days, where technology allows for that, because there's no time for you as the committee members to digest what is being said and incorporate that into the meeting materials and the agenda. And there's no time for staff to receive and digest it as well, so that we might bring you some responsive information to those comments. In particular, when the meeting is held on a Monday, as it is today, it's even more problematic when people send comments and materials in over the weekend, because staff is not looking for those comments over the weekend and would not generally see those until the morning before the meeting. And as the committee members, you have lives outside your responsibilities to the committee, and you may not actually see something until the morning of the meeting, and that makes it difficult for you to digest and read those materials.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, it's been the practice that we've provided, not unfortunately, but that we've provided you guys comments even up to the day of the meeting. I was going to suggest maybe putting something when we post the agenda maybe on the event or something, just letting people know that we need to have time to get the stuff together for you to digest it and give them an opportunity to provide comments, because it really is difficult when I'm passing stuff out the morning of the meeting for you to get it.
It's not your fault.
No, I understand,
You guys
but-
are doing the best you can, but what happens is that these come in, and then we're not able to get them into the materials that everybody that would have public access to the online materials gets to see. So even though maybe they copy 20 people, it doesn't matter, because it's not fair to the association members that
Correct.
should be receiving this, so that they can, communicate with their members, the association presidents. And it's also, I think, so I just would like to stress for everybody that's here that if you want to send your public comments, and we welcome them, and we want to have time to read them. And we can't read them if they come in on a Sunday night at 10 p.m. or on the morning on our way driving into a meeting, because it's just, we want to read everything. We go through the materials, and we got lots of emails, and it just makes it so that it's unfair for everybody that attends the meeting to not have all of the materials in front of them, just like we want to. So if you can, stress to your associations, that would be really great. That we want the letters and we want the feedback. We just need more time to go over everything. So, sorry. Alrighty, so now we're going to go on to staff reports and administration and management services.
You want to say anything?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So, Doug Oldmixon, I'm the commissioner. I'm the executive director for the commission. I have another role in which I'm the commissioner. And I just wanted to, be with you this morning because I was with you for the workshop portion of this meeting, and to the extent that there was a lot of comments at that time, and some areas of concern about where, how some of the topics that are being considered have been raised, and the options that are on the table, and the motivations behind all of that. I wanted to be available as a resource to the committee to help to address those kinds of issues as this discussion continues. So just kind of a general rubric I'd like to toss out is that at least one of the issues about the potentially conflicting public policies and the need to, or the desire to air those in a way that allows the folks who make public policy, our legislators primarily, to address that balance or that potential conflict between those two. That all is a very deliberate process that the committee needs to go through in analyzing it and making recommendations to the commission, at which point the commission will make some decisions about whether or not to include the topic and how it's phrased and how it's presented in the legislative agenda for 2019, right? So I guess the message that I would add to you guys overall is there's not an extraordinary sense of urgency on resolving this. I mean, on taking action today on this issue. I think there's still lots of opportunity to actually do very thoughtful consideration of the various, both investigation, fact-finding, and analysis on what the potential solutions to that might look like, or even how the question is phrased to the legislature, right? So that's why I just want to make sure that everyone understands, and I really do appreciate the number of people who have serious concern about it. We have serious concern about it too, but it is not something that has to be resolved this, today, this week, this meeting. Even I think the earliest possible recommendation for the legislative consideration will be sometime this fall. So we might be looking at action around in preparation for the August commission meeting. So that still leaves us time. So I just wanted to put that on the table for you guys and offer a voice of calm around the issues. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair, this is Adrian. I'm calling in from Tampa. I'm going to put you on mute, but I'd like to say a couple of words following Old Nixon. Would that be all right?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to walk into hopefully so that's background noise, so please forgive me. Hold on one short second. If I'm going to walk outside.
Sure.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yes.
At the last meeting, I didn't have a chance to speak to you all, but please understand that the commission really takes into heart what you guys were saying regarding all the problems that you have. I want you to make sure that you understand that the commission's on your side. Sunset coming in is going to be a bit challenging, but I was telling Barbara on the line earlier, I got on late. We got to try harder, number one, on technology. I was waiting for 20 minutes before I got on. I know we can do very little about that, but in this modern age, there's no excuse. I don't sell that many homes. We're commercial people, but my son just bought a house this past couple of months ago, and his fee for inspection was less than $300. I do not understand how you all can make money and still be able to have a living, and I understand why the concern about the recovery fund and O&E. We have to work harder in helping you do that. So make sure you know we're on your side. We're not against you. I want to make sure I go on record and mention that to you all.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your comments.
With that, I'll put you back on mute and go back to the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Oldmixon, and we will use you as a resource. We appreciate that you're being, you're here today. Okay. So, is there a report from administration and management, or is that the report?
I can just I just want to mention a couple of things. It's been mentioned in the newsletter the last couple of times, but we did finish up the tour, the strategic planning tour around the state, and got some feedback on that. And we're currently working on our strat plan for the coming year that we hope to have ready relatively soon, and then for the agency. And then we had our issue summit on Monday, April 2nd, and there was a longtime inspector committee member on one of the panels, Fred Wilcox, who I thought brought a really good perspective to the discussion, and there were some inspectors at the summit as well, so it was nice to see inspectors involved in that. But all of that is is mentioned because we're, trying to move forward and make sure that we give people as many avenues to weigh in on things going forward. And then one last thing has also been mentioned, and this is in the future, but the inspector rules will be opened up for rule review soon, so everyone in the room know that, for any comments. That really the purpose of that is to clean them up, see if there's any sort of things that need to be addressed. It's not a major overhaul of the rules, but if there's any issues that you guys want to address, let us know about them.
Can you explain what the inspector rules are under that term?
Subchapter R of Chapter 535 of the TREC rules. They're the rules that the Commission makes that govern the licensing, education standards, the SOPs of the inspectors. So they're up for review, and I think in August. They are open in August for review.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry. All right, so standards and enforcement services.
Michael Malloy, Standards and Enforcement Services.
Sorry, Mike.
So the first page is what's been done since the last inspector committee meeting, and the subsequent pages is just what we've done for this year. So since the last inspector meeting, there's been 4 advisory letters and 1 formal agreed order.
How many opens do we still have right now?
We were pretty on top of stuff. It's probably under 20 at this point.
Okay.
So, because a lot of these numbers are the higher numbers. That's stuff that was opened in the latter part of last year. So.
Most of these are just advisory letters. There's only one that was an agreed order.
A question on the first one, Mike, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The reason for disciplinary action, it says failed to provide a link. Was that actually the customer complaint or the consumer complaint?
I couldn't tell you, more than likely no.
Says it was.
Says the buyer. No, I know that. Yeah, I think he was saying the substance of the complaint.
Right, exactly.
A lot of times, people complain about something, and it may not be like, I don't know exactly for sure. I mean, I'd have to go back and look, but like for used wrong inspection form, usually we just catch that, and we're
Yeah.
reviewing someone
Okay,
that's
so-
doing, they complained about something else that resulted in not sufficient evidence or not a violation, but we noticed that they used the wrong form. The first one up there, that's more than likely someone, there's a buyer, they're not aware of that requirement, most of them, so we probably noticed it.
So we can probably assume on that first one that whatever the consumer complaint was, it was declared not valid, or it was just this thing was the only thing.
That's the only thing we advise them on. That's the only thing we do.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Education and licensing services.
Denise Sample, licensing manager. The first report is the fiscal year comparison of applications received, licenses issued, and renewal activities compared to this time year-to-date in the previous fiscal year. So we have received fewer applications this year-to-date compared to the previous year-to-date reporting period, about 58 fewer applications. The renewal rate is higher down at the bottom of the report. Total renewals from inspectors, it's a 75% renewal rate this year-to-date versus 68% for fiscal year 2016, and we report 2 years prior because the licenses renew on a 2-year cycle. The next report is the total number of license holder and registration or registrant status. And the middle of this report shows the different inspector license types and the total numbers. And from this time last year, February 2017, and to clarify, this is as of February 2018, we have 434 more inspector license holders. If there's no questions, we can go to the next report.
I think, yeah, please.
Okay. The inspector examination activity report as of February 2018, which shows the pass rates for the real estate inspector exam and the professional inspector exam. And for 2018, the first attempt pass rate for real estate inspectors 35%, and for professional inspectors 46.7%.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? The last report is the instructor distribution. And the bottom half of the report shows the approved inspector-instructor distribution. And those numbers, are holding steady compared to the February of last year and February of 2018. If there's no questions, that concludes my report.
All right, thank you very much, I appreciate it. Okay, so we're gonna move on to agenda item 6, discussion. This is a discussion only regarding the inspector working group recommendations for a legislative fix for all inspector consumer recovery issues. And I'll start with anybody on the committee, Brad or anyone else have? We recommended that we would retain the financial responsibility requirements and retain the per occurrence and aggregate policy limits of $100,000. The committee recommended to add language clarifying that the insurance requirements are for both general liability and errors and omissions. And we recommended to add language clarifying that defense within limits insurance policies are acceptable to satisfy the current insurance requirements or the suggested insurance requirements. And to add language allowing inspectors to include a limitation of liability clause in their contracts with consumers. So I'm going to open up for any discussion or any further.
We had our work group
Yeah.
meeting, and that was, we went through a lot of different stuff, a lot of scenarios and a lot of different things, and I think we covered a lot of different bases. We came up with a pretty reasonable compromising solution.
Well, we have public meeting comments, several people that would like to speak on this agenda item. I'm going to call on you one by one, but I'm going to ask that 3 minutes is your limit to give everybody a chance to give their opinion. The first person is Mike Hamill from Terry. You're going to defer. Okay. Mike Cothran.
My name is Mike Cothran.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I'm taking a look at this because obviously we know that the minutes from the working group meeting were not published, or at least that I could get to them. Your timing issue hits home with me that you talked about initially, and it is difficult for us too. But in regards to this, just as you deliberate on this, I think it's important to remember that this is not a balancing act where, should we do 300,000 or should we do GNL or should we get rid of the recovery fund or should we have a limiting clause? It's really about whether the the system as we have it right now, that's worked for about 10 years, 11 years now, is broke or not, and should it be fixed? And so as you deliberate, I would ask you to consider those things.
Thank you, Mike. James Southland? I can't read it. Sutherland, sorry.
Yes, ma'am. If y'all excuse me, I'd rather not stand. I have a disability. And that's the first thing I'm going to say is I'm a little disappointed that I came from across the street and this front entrance is not handicap accessible. I expected better. As far as this subject goes, I have 4 state license certifications. The inspector license is the only one that is requiring liability, general liability. I carry a lot, but when we're doing inspections, we always come up with a reason why we have a rule. Is there a particular call from the public where there's been problems to change this? Or I'm not understanding why this one profession, out of all the other inspectors in the state, they're not calling for all this. And it's creating a little bit of, it's a hardship on some of the inspectors, on quite a few. And I don't see that changing is, especially the G&L. I mean, I carry a $1 million worth of G&L because my commercial customers. When you're doing residential, there's really not a whole lot of need for this type of G&L. So I'm a little confused on why we would ask for that. So those are my comments.
Well, the insurance requirement didn't start with us. We reacted to the state legislature putting that into effect, that we didn't have a choice. As an entity, we had to abide by the state statute. The state statute within stated that we had to have liability insurance as inspectors. So first off, that didn't start with us. We had to do what the law said we had to do. And for the last 10 years, we've had it as, and there's been interpretations as far as the statute is concerned, as far as whether it was E&O or general liability or
I
not.
understand about the E&O.
And there's been a lot of that. So what we've been trying to do now, part of the issue is that was brought up before, and really why a lot of this started, was because we want to get the statute fixed to be very clear on what it is, so there isn't this interpretation and somebody's idea of what they think the legislature meant by this. We're trying to really nail it down to get clarification on that. The idea of bringing the general, the G&L, general liability into it is to be able to get rid of the recovery fund. If you have a general liability policy, you don't need the recovery fund anymore.
Help me with it. If I make a mistake and the recovery fund pays out, that's how that works, correct?
But if the recovery fund pays out, the inspector cannot do anything until, yes.
Lose your job.
Yeah.
General
exactly.
liability doesn't cover mistakes. I thought that was our E&O.
You're right, it does.
So,
But
I'm not getting
recovery
the
fund doesn't
correlation.
cover straight E&O issues. The recovery fund, if memory serves, is if somebody gets a judgment on an inspector, they have a civil judgment on an inspector for whatever reason, something that correlates with them, what they did in the house, they can apply for restitution from the recovery fund to satisfy that
So
civil
if I
judgment.
break a doorknob, I tell them I'm not gonna pay for it, then they go to the recovery fund?
They have
for a
to
doorknob?
sue you first, get a judgment, and then if they have a judgment, then they can go to the recovery fund. Am I correct in that?
That is correct.
They'll go to the recovery.
Right. That's what the recovery fund is for. Same with brokers on the real estate side. So the recovery fund only comes into effect if you have been sued and you've lost that suit and somebody has a judgment against you. That's the only time the recovery fund is paid. So the whole thing of bringing the general liability is that we didn't have two things in there. It's one or the other, either recovery fund or general liability. And since the general liability as an add-on rider for the policy is typically pretty minimal to do that, especially in the $100,000 range, we elected to get rid of the recovery fund and pay those funds back out to the inspectors that paid into it.
And then specifically write that it's errors and omissions and general liability. That way it covers errors and omissions, which is what you did or didn't report. And then general liability, your ladder went through somebody's expensive plate glass window and they're gonna sue you for everything, the window and everything inside the house that you need to replace. Everything becomes way more expensive once you've damaged.
So we're talking about an issue, has this ever occurred to where we've had to pay out, not because of an error, but because somebody broke something?
We had a report from insurance company showing a number of different claims, certainly not to nearly close to the 100,000, which is why we tried to keep it at that level instead of raising it as someone suggested. But there are claims against inspectors all the time, and there's a lot that ends up being paid out. Not necessarily because of that, but sometimes simply because it's just cheaper to pay it out than go through the legal battle of fighting whatever that case may be. People will sue you for anything.
But as far as I understand it, we've never had a payout from the recovery fund, is that correct?
No, we've had, it's just been a while.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
No, we've had a couple of payouts in the last couple of
Three in
years.
the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
3 in the last
They're
5.
very
Not
minimal
very often.
payouts, though.
Not very bad.
Well,
Only 12,000.
yeah, and we only have a $12,500
Limit.
limit, so they're never going to be very much, considering how much money is actually in the recovery fund right now. So,
That answer your
feel good
question?
or?
A little bit.
Well, and it's, the
Yeah.
claims are for persons who suffer actual damages from an inspector's act. That's the statutory language. So those damages may be caused by a mistake that the inspector makes or by breaking something in the house. It's actual damages from an inspector's act. So if the court awards a judgment, then that judgment can be brought to the recovery fund and be reimbursed from the recovery fund if it meets all of the other statutory criteria.
No, we're talking about getting rid of the recovery fund.
That's what we're.
That's one of the recommendations from the working group.
And that was based on, our suggestions are based on what we came up with when we met, with the associations being here, and we had a lot of people attending, and we tried to take into consideration, as much as we could about, everybody's opinions on where they think we should go forward, and I think a lot of this has to do with just clarifying. And we feel like if the recovery fund is something that goes by the wayside, we need to make sure that the consumers are protected. And on the same side of that, general liability protects you. Insurance, to me, protects all inspectors from somebody taking your house, taking your means of living, which they would if you temporarily, even if you had to use the recovery fund. Because if it gets that far, then you could possibly have an issue with how you make a living. And as a committee, we're concerned about that for inspectors and also for ourselves, because we all, want to do the same thing. So, okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. Phil Cordes?
I guess I'd just like to make sure that the committee considers the financial impact that some of these things might have on the consumer, because we're going to pass them on, so the inspection rates are going to go up. I mean, that has something to do with the general public, and protecting the general public up here.
And I have a question about that, because we get that, we hear that from the associations about we're passing it on and this is going to increase. But everybody is already carrying a $100,000 policy. So I'm assuming, yes, at a minimum, the errors and omissions. So if we are now passing more on to the consumer based on these new actions, how much do you think that would be if you add a general liability that costs, I don't know, a couple hundred a year?
Yeah, about
maybe?
600 or 800.
600 or 800?
Mine costs me,
For general liability, on a $100,000 policy.
They don't sell much less than $1 million. I think maybe $2 million, maybe another $15.
So the minimum general liability policy is $1 million?
No.
No, that's not the case.
No.
I carry
Yeah, carry listed. My company has $100,000 general liability.
And how much do you think that costs
It's
a
like
year? on
$150,
average?
$200 a year.
Okay.
We base that on the fact that most of the big builders say, if you come on our property, inspect one of our houses, it's get at least $500,000.
That's about what we're recommending.
That's
right.
But you can make the choice as a business owner to do that. We're not talking about making it standard for 3,000 inspectors to get $500,000 $1 million. We're only talking about $100,000.
Well, what we're doing is
As a
trying
way
to.
to help get rid of the recovery fund
Yeah,
also.
trying to say that this is a minimum amount that you have to carry to have a license with the state of Texas. So I guess we're trying to base what I'm asking is on $100,000 policy that you're required to carry by the state. How much would we be passing on to consumers per inspection? Let's say you do 300 inspections a year at a minimum. How much is that extra going to be to each consumer or each inspection?
I think it's minimal. First off, I think most inspectors that have E&O already have a general liability with them. And many of them are gonna have $1 million policy, specifically for those builders. You know, start on those builders. Yeah, let them go there.
But builders inspections are different.
Yeah. But having that liability, but in your situation, your costs don't go up at all because you already have that policy. So what we're talking about here, that wouldn't increase your cost because you already have a general liability policy with your E&O. Correct?
I hear what you said, I don't necessarily think that that's exactly right.
Well, I mean, in your situation that you just described, you have a much higher policy. You have $1 million G&L, right? Currently.
Yep.
Okay. So in what we're doing, what does that actually raise your costs that you're going to pass on to the consumer?
I think maybe he's speaking in general.
I'm thinking about other things that might be added on too. You know, I don't know what the final bill is gonna come out to be. You might say, well, we're gonna add this so that we're gonna make sure that the consumer is never affected or anything like that. So, you know, we went to a little more. I'm just saying, whatever your final outcome is, you need to consider that. Because this isn't the final thing. This isn't the final thing.
That was a huge part of the conversation we had in the work.
Absolutely. A big part of our consideration too isn't just that premium, but it's also the higher risk of lawsuit with that.
Absolutely.
The higher coverage.
Bigger target.
Your deductibles have to be met at that point. The threat of not renewing because of a previous case or threat of a case, those all come into consideration as well. So we're really thinking all those things through.
Madam Chair, the committee may recall that staff presented the committee with some data from various insurance agents that currently write these insurance policies for inspectors in the state. And according to that data, the minimum policy of $100,000 per occurrence, $100,000 aggregate, costs anywhere from $900 to $1,100 approximately per year. Those agents also said that if you add a general liability rider to that policy, that cost would go up $50.
I don't, that was proposed, was it not?
No, there was no proposed. That was the data that we received from Ben Garrison, Mr. Emmerich's insurance agent, and as well as other insurance agents that write insurance and have provided certificates of insurance to the commission. And that was consistent across the board, that to add a GL rider to the minimum policy would be $50.
I'm currently carrying both, and my rider was somewhat more than $50, and I'm carrying with one of the larger insurance companies in the state.
Are you carrying the minimum?
I am on my E&O, and I believe I am on the GL on that policy. I carry a separate liability policy beyond that.
Well, if you're carrying
If you've got that document, would you support that with the document for us today?
If you're carrying a separate policy for GNL, that's different than getting a rider for an existing policy.
Do you have a copy of that letter of those things supporting that $50 raise for GNL?
I can research that and get back to the committee. It's in the past materials from the committee meetings, the early on committee meetings when we first brought these issues to the committee.
It was in the previous issues, and one of the questions
Yeah.
that was brought up, that I brought up specifically in that, was those insurance numbers from those insurance carriers, were they for inspectors that are sole proprietors or multiple inspectors? Because I think that has a huge impact on what that cost is. And I don't think we ever got clarification.
That certainly can be. The questions that we asked those insurance agent was if a single inspector came to you and wanted to get a minimum policy under the statute, what would that cost be? And on average, the cost ranged from $900 per year to $1,100 per year. And we asked what other costs inspectors would cover, and most of the insurance agents that we spoke to said that they would sell a GL rider to that policy so that an inspector is covered all the way around, and that rider would cost an extra $50 in addition to the average fee, premium fee of $900 to $1,100.
And that's based on what kind of gross revenue? Did they, remember what they said on that?
It's not about gross revenue. It's
They
simply.
all want to know what your gross revenue is. It definitely is based on gross revenue.
Okay.
Well, then all that we can probably extrapolate is that a new inspector, this is their first year, their 100,000 E&O and their 100,000, then their general liability is going to be a little bit more than somebody that's been inspecting for 12 or 15 years or more. And then they base it on how many inspections do you do a year? I know that's on mine. And how much do you think your annual income is per year? And then of course, how long is your experience level? And so I think that it's not going to be the same for everybody. It's just no way to say across the board it's only going to be $50, or it's not going to be more than $150. I mean, there's no way to know that because there's different insurance companies. But I don't think it's the general liability is so significant that it's going to put somebody out of business, even as a new inspector. That's my opinion. So
That was a conversation we had. I followed up with Lee about that because I was more uncomfortable with keeping the E&O in play, and it's already been in play for so many years, and all the inspectors are already operating under the E&O policy rules. To add the G&L is, I would not think it's going to put anybody out of business or raise the cost substantially enough to the consumer that's going to affect their ability to have inspections performed.
I think adding the GNL is going to have a minimal impact because I think so many inspectors already have the GNL policy as part of what they do. So I think the impact not only to the inspector but the consumer is going to be minimal. That's there, but the coverage to the consumer is substantially better and more complete by doing it.
because you're covering the sellers whose house you're at and could damage, and you're covering your buyers who could be harmed if something is missed and it's significant.
That level of coverage for the home inspectors has been missing for a while, and it is, if you analyze everything, a very good deal to have that general liability. We are required to carry that on the pest control side for termite inspections, but it's specifically for that part of it. It doesn't cover the inspection part of it, home inspection part of it. So I've always felt comfortable having that general liability in place because if something does go wrong and you don't have it, there's a lot more damage that could result to the home inspector.
That has nothing to do with what you just got paid for. It's really something that you didn't get paid for, which is something on the seller's property.
And the G&L is a lot less controversial all the way around on all state agencies.
Right.
Everybody's requiring that.
Right. I think most of the states that have any licensing, and Kristen, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but they, at a minimum, they carry general liability.
I've got 3 licenses. They are not required.
Okay. Well, I mean, I know like TDA requires.
She was commenting on other state.
Yeah, we got, for our last meeting, we had some data from Kristen about what other states are carrying that are licensed states. And it's about maybe half of
From
the
other
states
states.
licensed, and they, at a minimum, had general liability, even if they didn't have
That were
E&O. And some of their
required
general
by the
liability policies were super high, like 350 or
Well,
even more.
yeah, the minimum was 50,000 on the ones that required it, up to 300,000 in Florida.
Yeah.
Remember, we're just a liaison for you guys. We don't make any laws or changes.
We're just
offer our
making
recommendations
suggestions to
the
help
commission.
with the legislature that helps protect our industry and those that use us, which is our clients.
If my recollection is correct, the 50,000 was Louisiana maybe?
Is
And
South
it was
Dakota doesn't have any houses?
General liability on it. And we can pull those up.
Okay, so Jim Hine?
I think Mr. Sutherland answered my question. I do disagree
It's at the
on
bottom.
some of the costs that are asked through today because we're not living with a even fee-based structure. We don't all charge 6%.
Right.
And
No,
everybody has a
the
different
PDFs.
pricing method about what kind of
No.
inspection they produce, the level of inspection they want to provide to the consumer, and they have different costs. Just name of the game.
Right.
The way it is.
And we got to keep in mind that, that when we're talking about this $100,000 policy and general liability, we're talking about inspections that are only for, that meet our standards for an inspection that we use our report form for. It's not new homes that are being constructed that don't fall under TREC anyway. And we're not talking about commercial, which don't fall under the real estate commission anyway.
The
So
majority
there's-
cover this.
326.
Right, so what I'm talking about is anything
Okay.
that's a residential
Sorry.
inspection that our license is for. So.
I guess the other problem with that, if I can interject real quick, just to be quiet, but, in my industry that I see every single day, where most of the inspectors get their work is from a favorite inspector list from a realtor work. Of course, there's a reason why they're on a list, and it's not necessarily good for the consumer to be on a list, pick an inspector from a realtor list, okay? But that's probably the majority of what I see out there, okay? And I'm just sorry about just shooting out there. I'm sorry about the guy that spent $300 for an inspection.
Yeah.
Because I see what kind of inspection he might have had, in my opinion, okay? And I wouldn't want that for me or my mother or anybody that I know. But at the end of the day, we have to compete against that low bid type person out there every single day. And you can't offer the consumers sometimes to even meet the standards of practice. Point case, grounding and bonding. You've got to be an expert in grounding and bonding to comply with the standards, because anything that happens in grounding and bonding, you're responsible. Okay? That's a very broad statement. So we're put up against a very broad standards of practice, which is good from that standpoint, that I can meet with that standard, I think. There's a lot of weaknesses in it as well, but we have this discussion coming up soon.
Yeah.
We're going to go back through there and this is the back end, hopefully, because in my opinion, throughout the years, it's been watered down. Inspections, our standards of practice do not help anybody, especially the new people on the street. A guy coming out and getting a license doesn't know anything. No one's taught him how to inspect the house. Without a standards of practice out there for him to follow, specifically looking at grading and drainage, what to look for during grading and drainage on those items there. Get elevation change, a foundation and sidewalk maybe. Positive flow away from it, getting more descriptive in there. Taking all this stuff out in the past has not helped the public at all. It's horrible, actually.
Well-
And I have to compete against people that line it up, because I hear every single day, I don't have to do it. And I get so sick of hearing that. I grew up with home building, and anybody came to me and said, man, I don't have to do it, I fired them on the spot. You have to do it, okay? I have to have a higher level of standard than anyone else in the street, because that's the way I grew up, that's the way I was raised, that's what my business profile is, okay? And to be able to compete against those people is real tough, it really is. I get angry sometimes.
Well, Jim, it would be really great when they have a standards of practice subcommittee meeting. A lot of inspectors don't attend those meetings, the subcommittee meetings, but it would really be helpful to Dwell and the other members here for you and others that have concerns about our standards of practice to attend those meetings, because you guys can be super specific about what it is you'd like to see, and that would really be helpful to the subcommittee.
When you look throughout America, a lot of people in the States, I've seen in Oklahoma, I've seen in Louisiana, they copy basically our standards of practice. InterNACHI's copied our standards of practice. I see our format of a report out in other states and posted on the internet as their example copy.
We should charge.
And we should charge for that. But at the end of the day, Texas leads the nation in all this stuff. We're placed on a higher level of Pro2 than anyone else out there, okay? I appreciate that. I like that myself. But it gets to a point sometimes where you got to step back and look at it and go, do we really need all that? I see no history of complaints, money paid out to have this extra layer of economic to on top of it. It's just, it doesn't make sense.
The way we-
So it's like, I give you a nickel today, tomorrow you take a dime. I feel like that's what's gonna happen.
As regulations tend to change in America and in Texas, as they will, we have to kind of cut those off by taking the approaches we're taking down. We don't want to water it down unnecessarily or beef it up unnecessarily. And I agree with you that we can construct our standards of practice around more of a helpful document as opposed to a confusing document for people getting into this business.
Personally, what I would like to see will never happen. If somebody calls me on the phone, if I can give them a copy, here's my standards of practice, what it says I don't have to do.
A lot of inspectors actually provide that.
And have people hire you based on that. They won't, they'll hang up the phone on you, okay? Lickety split.
I apologize, I don't mean to interject, but we kind of have to stay on the actual item of discussion that we're in.
But when the subcommittee,
Absolutely.
standards of practice.
Absolutely, we definitely want to be
subcommittee
involved.
is- All right, David Sweet.
I think I'll defer for it now.
Okay. And Jim Evans.
I had, the one question I would have is, with all of this, do we have an opinion from the Attorney General regarding the need for E&O versus GNL, or GL versus a bond? Do we have a definition about that?
I think originally it was asked, they asked, correct me if I'm wrong, but the TREC asked the AG for a specific opinion on whether it meant general liability or E&O, and they basically deferred it back to the TREC, correct?
That's correct. The Attorney General said that it's TREC statute and TREC has the authority to interpret what that means.
And so there's not been any new, okay. that's-
Not on the AG side.
Right, that's.
The legislature's taken it up since then, but.
Okay.
Which is a big part of why we wanted to clarify.
To clarify that.
Since we're going through the sunset process already, let's fix the statute so it's very clear. So
That's
there
one of the
isn't this gray
questions
area.
that I hear over and over from the inspector community is, why haven't we seen this from the AG? And now I have an answer for it, so
Right.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so, yeah, I guess, I'm not sure, Kristen, you put some information in for us. Is that from the?
I just had
previous-
Tony pull up the information that we provided at the working group meeting, and this was a chart that showed the different states that do regulate inspectors and what the insurance requirements are in those states. And at the bottom, we summarized all of the information in the charts. Of the 34 states that actually regulate and license home inspectors, 23 of those states require some form of insurance. 11 of those states do not require any form of insurance. And then of the 23 that require insurance, the coverage, 9 require both E&O and GL, 5 require only E&O, 9 require only GL coverage. And then as far as the limits in those 23 states, 17 of those states, so a sizable majority, almost 2/3, require limits of $200,000 or more. 6 of the states that require insurance have limits of less than $200,000. And those limits vary as to whether they are per occurrence limits versus aggregate limits. If you scroll up in the chart, you'll see that, like at the top, Pennsylvania requires both E&O and GL, and the aggregate amount is $500,000, and the per occurrence amount is $100,000. Then the very next line, Rhode Island, they too require both E&O and GL, but the aggregate amount is specified $500,000 for each. There is no per occurrence amount specified in that statute. And then you see Texas highlighted in yellow. We require E&O. The aggregate amount is $100,000, and the per occurrence amount is $100,000.
Do we have any conceptual idea of what the bond purchase would cost to have that same alternate coverage? We researched any of that as opposed to getting the actual insurance?
I don't have any cost information for purchasing a bond. That is an alternative that's provided in the statute.
Thank you.
I'm curious, Kristen, and I know, just ask questions and you're supposed to have all that. It's actually data. But do we have any, do you know just off the top of your head, how many people, how many inspectors in Texas are using bond only or have a bond or have gone that route?
I'm not aware of any inspector that is actually using the bond as an alternative.
Trek wouldn't be privileged to that information anyway that I know.
Yeah,
we
because it's their way of
See what
meeting the financial responsibility requirements. And the reason that was put in the statute to begin with was the concern about the insurance going away.
Right.
And there needed to be an alternative to that. So that's why that was put in there.
Is there any way we can find that out? I know we're kind of late in the game on looking
How many
at that.
how many have a
How many
bond?
are bonded?
There isn't any today.
Yeah, I didn't think
None at
there
all?
was.
There are none
So
today.
nobody bought that one, even though there was a big concern
Bonding,
about all
bonding
the
is
insurance
generally
was gonna
far
go
more
away.
expensive
Oh, yeah.
because it requires putting up assets, right?
Okay, right.
That's one portion of it. It's one possibility. And then the second is, I mean, as long as there is a robust, as long as there are sufficient alternatives in the insurance market. But when this was looked at by the legislature the last time that we looked at this, the same issue came up. What about if insurance goes away entirely? What if the market, what if all the companies just say, this is terrible, you know, we come up with the new equivalent of black mold that nobody knows what to do with and everybody pulls out of the market, right? Then what are we gonna do about that, right? There still needs to be some way to meet the statutory requirement for some level of consumer protection, and so we put a bonding alternative.
Right.
That doesn't mean that it would, you know, that it would be affordable or used or whatever. I suspect that the insurance market is far more malleable, you know, if several major companies pulled out for some particular reason, likely someone else would see an opportunity and step in.
Right.
Yeah, it's
But it has happened before. I understand from other inspectors that there have been times in the past when it was very difficult to get coverage.
The other
So we added that.
The other possibility is if you, as an inspector, have a claim against her and all of a sudden you can't get insurance again, it gives you some other means to still be able to, albeit more expensive, to still stay in business.
Right.
I just found it hard using, I know we're just using that for example, but Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, the cost of housing there is so much higher than it is here in Texas. It's maybe not be fair for
Which we had
people out in the audience here looking at.
Well, we can look at Oklahoma, Louisiana, the surrounding
Okay.
states.
Yeah, we had that
So-
conversation as part of the work group as far as housing costs and whatnot, and that's what, a big part of what factored
And
in
you go to
there.
San Francisco, it's like outrageous.
Well, California doesn't regulate inspectors, so.
I mean, if you look, Louisiana is similar to Pennsylvania. They require E&O and GL. Their aggregate amount is lower. It's $300,000. They don't specify a per occurrence amount in their statute.
And their licensing requirements are somewhat more
I like-
lenient than ours.
I kind of like Louisiana because they're more, we have more of a, like the Waster board or whatever they have there that we don't really have in Texas.
What?
Their inspector board comes and offers these kind of rates for them to pull up for people to use. 300,000 doesn't bother me at all. I carry $500,000 easy because, you know, I want to do it, I want to be insured. But where these numbers come from is sometimes they just come out of the air. I feel. It's just not-
Well, Florida.
Of the inspectors in the room, how many of you carry more than the statutory minimum? Just by a show of hands?
I have 100 on me, but I have more on the phone. I haven't.
When we pass those costs along, even if they be minimal, we still have to pass it along. But, you know, the gentleman over here brought up, a lot of us do new home construction. I do 90% sometimes new home construction. Builder wants $1 million just to walk into his property. In Houston, they won't let you on, period. We don't want to talk to you. Some of them get so ridiculous, they want to, I'm going to exaggerate, $54 million car policy, an automobile policy assigned to them for a public street. It's absolutely phenomenal, you know?
So
They try to limit it.
is it a correct statement to say that the market, in many instances for inspectors, is requiring you to carry more than what is required in the statute?
I feel that does.
Some places that, I know in our area, of probably 60 builders, I only have 2 that are even interested in knowing if I have insurance. So I don't have, I mean, like some of you guys, maybe it's a big market thing, but when you're in a smaller market, north here in Austin, I don't have any builders
Four
required.
evil builders in a big city, you know,
Yeah.
they're really vicious.
But
But
you make
that's
that,
not,
you make
that's
that
not regulated by Trek.
Right.
That's,
You make
you
that
don't have
choice
to be
as
a
a
Trek
business owner.
inspector to do those inspections.
Yeah, you just need to be IRC inspector. And then you have your IRC certification, and you can do that without having anything to do with the real estate commission.
But to say most of them
Bill
require
Wall
it,
is on,
I don't
let's
see
on
it.
property though, anyway, if you're an IRC inspector, he still wants insurance.
Right,
Because you
right.
get the buyer with it.
Right.
But I don't find that to be the case that most builders do that either. There's, what, 3, maybe 4 in our area that are starting to do that. And it's not an insurance issue, it's an issue of them,
Builder issue.
they're trying to prevent inspections.
Right.
That's what it is, that's what it amounts to. So, I mean, but that's a whole different issue, but that's not really what we're talking about the minimum for the vast majority of the inspections that are done. As a business owner, you can certainly bump that up, and a lot of inspectors obviously do.
But it's not Trek related.
Exactly.
Not at all.
Exactly.
And I feel like that with my business, and, you know, the cost of my insurance is only one facet of the things that I have to combine to come up with what my inspection fees are gonna be. You know, owning a truck and the tools, and insuring my tools, so that if they got stolen, general liability, then or my truck insurance, that I would get them back or be able to replace them. And gas, as gas goes up and down, there's a lot of facets. Having an office, all contribute to inspection fees. So I realize that the $100,000 insurance is just one part of that, but there's a lot of things in our businesses that can fluctuate to also change our fees to our clients. So it's a package deal of having a company that you run and pays your the house you live in and feeds your family. So I think that we need to keep all things in perspective about what our costs are also. That insurance is a piece of it, but it's not the only piece of it. And $100,000, it looks like we could be at $250 or $500, or we could separate it and say those who live in Houston who have more expensive houses, theirs is higher than Austin. But we don't do that, obviously. That's silly. But I just think that I feel like that we're in a good place with $100,000 for errors and omissions and $100,000 for general liability. But obviously, we're not deciding this today, and so everybody's opinions, if there's more other than what we've discussed.
And Brian brought up a good
today.
point. It's our standards are substantially higher than many of these other states that have higher amounts. So it's a balance.
And I think our standards of practice is what keeps us safe to some extent. And I understand what you're saying. In some ways, maybe not, but as an inspector, when you get your license and when you go through classes, there's plenty of information on grading and drainage, you know, that you are supposed to learn as part of getting your license. So it could be that, you know, if the standards of practice isn't as detailed in some places, maybe that's because we had pushback in the past against making our standards of practice detailed, and thus they became less detailed. So how do we balance out what we wanted 5 years ago to what now everybody wants?
I don't think our standards of practice are the problem. Our real problem is our poor education system. We have the most atrocious educational program I've ever seen. We're not teaching inspection, we're teaching the IRC, how to pass the test. And that's not what our business is about. Our business is designed to go into a real estate transaction, identify deficiencies in the house, not code deficiencies, but deficiencies per the standards of practice. And our education is so deficient because we're not doing that. They're teaching them how to pass a test, the national exam that we went to, based on code information. I get calls every day, and all the older inspectors around here say the same thing. I've got my professional license. Can you teach me how to inspect a house?
I thank God I spent 20 years in home building before I got to this. It's amazing.
Our program is wrong. Our 40-hour ride-along is not right. You can't go out with 10 people on a ride-along program and teach them how to inspect a house. Our program could be changed to where we had 200 hours of in-field apprentice requirement and then the other 250-hour classrooms to really teach them how to inspect a house before they license. But the legislature didn't see fit that because the inspectors did not want the competition and want to bring them in. That's why we've got the fast track, and the fast track is an atrocious disaster, in my opinion.
You should have seen the backlash we got when we introduced the 40-hour ride-along requirement. I mean, even when we tried to do that, people just don't like the change, and that everybody thought you'd never get instructors and whatnot. So anytime you have insurance and stuff like that, people look at change.
The problem not standards, the problem is education.
Public's not served well.
Well, that would be the education
Yep.
committee.
Right.
I was gonna say, you,
Okay,
was that
now we got
$200? Good start. Let me get that started.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to the repeal subchapter H, chapter 1102, and eliminate the real estate inspector, I call them their names. And repeal the real estate inspection recovery fund, which we've touched on that already a little bit, because that has to do with putting the general liability in place. And is there any discussion from the committee members on that? I feel like we just did this.
Well, I think, we,
We kind of beat that to death.
Yes, so-
If we're gonna require E&O and general liability, there's really no need for the recovery fund.
Right.
The recovery fund, as it was structured and set up originally, covered both errors and omissions and general liability. If you broke something in a house and they sued you, you couldn't pay for it, then the recovery fund, after they got a judgment, could come in and pay it for damages or errors and omissions.
and that's when we didn't have insurance requirements.
There's
So
no
really,
need for both, in my point.
Since we've had insurance, the recovery fund has been minimally used, which is what was expected. And then I think that years back, 2009 or whenever, the discussion was to repeal the recovery fund and send it, and then do some sort of disbursement. But so I don't really. I'm assuming that's the direction it would go if the recovery fund was removed.
Happy to at least repeat the scheme that was proposed previously, or the process that was proposed previously that had general buy-in, but not 100%. Okay, so it got pulled out of the last bill. But it was essentially this, that everyone who held a license would receive an amount. And at the time it was $100. Everybody paid in $100. So if you still had a license, you'd get $100 back. The balance would be held for a 2-year period to make sure that there were no outstanding claims. And then at the end of that period, whatever was left would be paid to the general fund. That was the proposal. That everybody pretty much agreed to. Everybody gets their money back, protect whatever latent claims there might be, and then the rest of it goes to the general fund, which is where all the excess goes anyway today.
Can we donate that? I mean, I don't want $100. I'd rather give it to homeless or something, you know?
Well, you
can do whatever you want to.
You can do what happens to it. We can just put it on your account and pay for your next renewal.
You can pay your association.
Let's don't get into banking and credit business.
If the insurance companies were to pull
There's
out
your
of
GL
Texas, like
policy
in
right
this
there.
scenario, and we still had the fund in place, wouldn't it be better to have the fund in place than buy a bond?
What was the question?
That wouldn't meet the current statutory minimum requirement to have $100,000 of consumer financial protection.
That
The
would be
fund doesn't do that.
Track it up that standard. They can
No,
up
we
the-
can't. It's the
they can up
statute.
Well, they can change the statute for our limits.
Change the statute?
We can't change the
That's
statute.
legislature.
I mean, the legislature has to do that. So, and that really was that mechanism. I get it. I know exactly where you're going with that, and I understand that if, in the very unlikely event that the insurance market completely blew up, we would be stuck with this, okay, how do you meet the legislature's requirement for you to have $100,000 worth of financial protection in place. How do you do that? The bond is one option. That doesn't mean that there wouldn't be other options that came out at that time, but it's one of those highly unlikely things, but you know, it's not unheard of that it hasn't happened.
But the recovery fund would be a cushion during that time of change.
It wouldn't meet the requirement.
Okay, so I don't know if we have any more public comments with those that chose to hold their comments. That's everything on the
On agenda item 6, yes, ma'am.
agenda item 6.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we're going to move on to agenda item 7, discussion and possible action regarding amendments to 22 TAC 535.201 definitions, and that was the definition of client.
So this is on the agenda merely to address any comments that we got. You had already made a recommendation to the commission to propose this for publication and review. We haven't had a commission meeting yet, but I just wanted to address this if in fact we got any comments, which we have received none.
Okay.
So.
When is the next commission meeting?
May
7th.
7th. Thank you.
May 7th?
May 7th, yes, ma'am. So anyway, we have not received any comments about this particular change.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to agenda item 8, request for future meeting agenda items. Anybody on the committee?
So at some point we need.
Yeah, maybe we'll address some education issues.
There you go.
For that subcommittee.
200 hours of ride-along with Brad.
Not right along.
Well, do we want the education subcommittee to meet first so that they can then come up with an
Yeah,
agenda
I think
item
that's a
for
great
us
idea.
that's specific about what we're talking about with education?
Sure.
I think Brad was being funny.
No.
Well,
That's
I
never
agree
fair.
I agree with Brad.
I agree with Brad.
Is anybody in here that doesn't agree with me?
Well, I mean, we've all agreed, I know as the 10 years I've been here, that education was a problem. But if we were here when we decided to eliminate correspondence courses and try to get more hands-on training, it was pretty messy. And it was thought of as the first step. And maybe we are looking at the next step, if we want to proceed from there, is based on what the requirements are now to be a real estate inspector. Where do we want to take, where do we, you know, that staircase, where do we want the next step to be?
I think it's a good time to really dig back into it. I mean, we did the ride-along thing, and we kept pushing the effective date, the cutoff date of that back, because everybody was afraid that nobody could catch up and that we wouldn't have enough ride-along instructors. And guess what? We have plenty of ride-along instructors, and it's just not.
Are they
hasn't been
being
an issue.
used? Yeah.
But that hasn't been an issue. The big fear was that we were going to put that into place and nobody could get a license because they couldn't get a ride-along instructor. And obviously that was not the case.
We've got another
because we have
400 licenses since this time last year.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we have over 1,400 in the last 2 years.
So future agenda item is going to be education specifically right along, or do we want to be more specific?
Education in general.
In general.
Because we're looking at all the aspects of the licensing.
I think this is a really good time to do this, simply because we're doing it with the SOPs. And if we have two committees that can work more closely on this, both of these updates, I think we could be a lot more effective than doing it piecemeal.
I mean, the SOP, they're kind of tied in the sense that our intent was using some of the results from the testing to modify our training, because the testing will give us information on where the weak areas are. A little bit from enforcement, but I think we kind of know, you know, some of it is just reading which form you're filling out.
Yeah.
But the results from the testing show weak areas that we can, if we wanted to modify the training to try to address those weak areas, and also if there are any weaknesses that are exposed in the SOP. And if you were around in the last SOP 6-7 years ago, Brian and I worked on that for like 2 years, and it was very messy also.
I just want to say, and I apologize if this was already addressed when I was trying to pull this chart up, but maybe a good starting point as well is to determine what the committee has the authority to recommend in terms of rule changes versus what's
Right.
statutory. Because there are certain things that can't be changed by the commission because they're put in statute. So
Yeah.
maybe that's a good starting point in terms of tweaks that you guys can recommend.
That would, I would probably, I personally would probably start with talking with you of all the things that are mandated, what can be modified at our level?
Right.
And what takes the jump to the next level?
Well, Tony, would it be in our purview on the future agenda item to discuss the subchapter R? Inspector rules for inspectors, can we discuss that, or is that only a
No, of course.
legislative statute?
Of course you can
I would like
discuss
to
that. Yeah,
have
that's-
that as part of
That's,
this discussion.
and maybe we could do that, because I think we were talking initially, before everyone got started, about possibly meeting sometime in July. Maybe we could just do a brief kind of snapshot of that prior to the full rule review going in, so that just everyone is familiar with what's in there.
Yeah, I think that would be great, because
Okay.
for me, it's not something I've probably read recently.
Okay.
Well, Madam Chair, the one thing that I'd like to offer on that is if the Education Committee is meeting on their related issues and the SOP is relating on their issues, there are still other items within subchapter R that would be just general purview that the committee might want to look at.
Okay.
Just to say, no, this is good, this is good. Here's one area that might need some clarification.
Right.
Can I add?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to create Brad over here. I'm an instructor with, I do continuing education. People that come to these classes want core education. You can't do it continuing for a core, you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense sometimes. You talk so far over their heads that they don't really understand what you're talking about. And the other problem I'd like to see when we get to the education part of the meeting is required testing. Get that back in the legislature. You take classes down, there's no required testing. They can sit there and sleep all day long, and you've got to give them a piece of paper. Okay?
We really wanted to do that, and there was a lot of, I mean, that was part of, I am like that. I would like to see retesting like every 5 years or something like
All my
that.
life. It's time for other people to bring it.
Yeah, but I mean, there was so much pushback from the associations and from providers and that give these continuing ed classes to test.
I don't see how that protects the public not testing someone that they have not learned, you know?
Didn't we just added the testing requirement in some?
Well, there's
in some aspects
for
of
the
the classes, right?
mandatory.
The mandatory
Yeah.
courses have.
There is, but for
Right.
elective,
But the elective courses don't, and that, that's part of the whole discussion as well as sort of, I mean, that's one of the things you guys do have control over is in terms of hours and subjects for that, some of that stuff.
I mean, I'm all for testing to just try, not just to be testing, but to see if they actually absorbed it, and to get real life feedback on how well that class was. Like you say, I go to classes, we've been to classes where if you did sleep the whole day, you really didn't miss anything. And it's like, really, I could have been out working for a living today. And without an exam, maybe there's no supporting information that this class really isn't working. And that all comes back to the education side, working on education. We have lots of inspectors out there that are very good at what they do, but we rely on those inspectors to also teach. And not everybody has the ability to teach. But it's revenue generating for some inspectors, and they do it. Maybe requiring everybody that has an instructor license to have some education training, how to teach.
I think we're headed in that direction
Yeah.
already.
We have that now.
We're not,
the ATI.
only on some courses.
For legal and ethics.
On some of your courses, there's no educational requirement for
No.
training, but there will be.
There's no.
That's
Are
coming.
we talking core training or continuing education?
Well, start with continuing.
education.
Okay.
But if they're coming to continuing education and want core education, that tells me again, they weren't being taught in core.
Right.
So our system is not
They're not
working.
talking for it. They're not. It's over
There's,
your head.
there's not currently any requirement for instructors to be trained on how to teach.
And you rely on the standards. to
There is
include
on the
that.
real estate
But-
side.
But we're in the process of working on that. is my
Well, it's part of the
understanding.
discussion, yes, but that was something that was held off just because it, I think at the time seemed a little jarring for,
Well,
to
we
jump
thought
to
that
that right there.
would, like the ride-along, we thought that would reduce the pool of
Right.
instructors so
Right.
much that there would be a trouble for inspectors to find instructors. I don't know if it's the case, but that was the feedback. Of course, anytime we recommend something, there's just a barrage of, we can't afford to do that, we can't do it, there won't be anybody out there. You know, people said, nobody's gonna sign up to be ride-along guys, you're taking away our correspondence courses. We're gonna lose half our inspector committee, and, you know, we've grown 30% since then, with the new requirements, the harder requirements, getting rid of correspondence courses. You know, so.
That's
Were
all-
we
that's
now-
all through, attrition, though. A lot of people would leave and a lot of people would come in.
Well, there's also been
Well,
a
for
real
every one
effort.
that left, two
there-
came in.
There's been a real
Yeah.
effort on the
There's over
on the staff side
1,400
to.
of the 3,300 inspectors at the beginning, middle of last year
You got new
were
robots.
newly licensed.
We got new robots out there. And the way I look at it is we'll make a robot, have the standard practice help those robots out, okay? Have the standards tell them what to do, basically, okay? And I know I'm going over, but I'm just making.
Then we
a
end
point,
up with
okay?
the standards of practices like that.
If that's what it takes, that's what it takes.
Okay, well, we will put that on the agenda item for next. Tony? go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, there's been an effort to make sure that the courses that are getting approved meet the new curriculum standards, and there's been there were a lot of providers who had to step up their game to get to those standards, and they have. So
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of improvement in terms of what's being offered out there now. I don't know if it's just fairly new, so I don't know how much of it's actually trickled down to.
And a few providers that went away
Yeah.
when some of those standards went.
Mr. Coughlin, I saw you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention and chime in with Brad's comment. The associations, and I'm sure Terry's the same way, we get calls every day and experienced inspectors around the room, I'm sure you do, these new guys coming out of class, and they're just completely unprepared to do what we are supposed to be doing, an SOP, property condition inspection. And honestly, from licensing, it seems to me like what you'd want to do is go back to these guys that are hitting the ground and can't run. You got a big pool of 400 plus that I would email out and ask them suggestions, because they're the ones that are in the middle of this problem. But also don't exclude the associations, because we're the ones that are getting hit with them, and they are just not being prepared coming out of classes to do what the license requires them to do. So a couple of sources of information and perhaps a bunch of good suggestions too.
And we've always been consider the fact that we require more training than any other state in the country. And it's not reflected in our exams.
Well, part of the reason that the ride-along problem situation had so much bucking up against it is because of the way it's laid out. And we don't have to get into that here, but certainly in your meeting, that would be an appropriate thing to get into. It's got some misleading and counter aspects to the way the system is.
Enlighten me.
Well,
No, not
In an
right
email,
now.
in an email.
Not now. Yeah.
The Sunday night before the next meeting.
Yeah.
You have things,
No, not
you have
me neither.
opinions like that, email me.
No, but truthfully, I think this is great, because when we try to, anytime we try to up the standards a little bit, we usually get so much blowback from people. And this is the first time in a while where people seem to be, yeah, let's make the quality
And I'm
better.
not for, if anybody's thinking, I'm not for making more hours. If anything, less hours
Better
might be a
hours.
better way,
Just
but be more effective in the hours.
Quality over quantity.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
I
so-
pulled up a guy in Houston, I forgot his license number, and I
Oh,
really
my
wanted to do it before I came here. 30 apprentices.
Okay.
How does that work? One guy, 30 apprentices, aren't you supposed to monitor apprentices?
Yeah.
I'll leave it alone.
Yeah, well, I
We'll come
have
back
to
to
stick
that.
to the agenda
Okay.
because of what is on there. in
So
our-
we
in
know
our open meeting.
education is going to be on the agenda.
Education, standards of practice. And Jim, did you know?
One point is that to the chairs of the subcommittees, please reach out to the associations. We would love to have some input on those. We would love to provide you with some information from our association. We can be a voice there too. Thank you.
The main part of the meetings is to do exactly that, is to reach out, let you guys know what our plans are.
Exactly.
So please be active like you are today at these subcommittees. They're really important to get your feedback.
If you guys can also help us to be informed as to when those things are happening, so that we can be involved. That
Everything
is-
should be posted on Trek's website. I know that's hard, I know.
Well, but I can make sure when we get everything posted that it gets sent out to.
We're talking three organizations here, if you can.
There's just certain rules that we have to abide by within the open meeting
Who's the third?
standards.
Who's the third?
Not to let them know.
But I get emails every day from all three of them. I don't know how many reminders from all the associations about today, so the word does get out.
Yeah. Okie dokie, so now we need to look at agenda item 9, discussion of future meeting dates, and we were gonna talk about July, Tony?
That was just what was thrown out. I mean, it can be, whenever, but I don't have access
Just
to.
at some point, do we need to put number 6 for a vote?
No,
No,
we
there's
can't
just
because
discussion.
there's
Okay.
discussion
Not
on
today,
it.
but you can put it on for a future meeting.
Yeah, it's going to be a future agenda.
Yes, but not probably, well, yeah. Okay, so I guess we have to go with the real estate commission's schedule too.
They don't meet till August, do they?
We meet in May and then again in August.
So if we did the middle of July, either 9th or 16th,
Should be good.
or the 13th or the 20th. Or we could meet on the 6th.
I can do 6.
6th probably not good.
Probably not fair.
The 13th or 20th for a Friday, or the 9th or 16th, good for anybody?
Can't do the 9th.
Can't be the 9th?
I can.
The
Good, let's
16th
plan it
for
for the
me is
9th.
good right now. The 16th is good for me. What about staff and real estate?
I don't see anything on
No,
the 16th, but I don't know.
Not the
Anything on the
9th, it's the
16th.
13th or the 20th, 9th or 16th.
16th, nothing's showing up, and I'll make sure it's soon after this meeting is put on the calendar, if that's what you guys agree to.
All right, that's my youngest son's 41.
Wow. So you
July,
were
yes,
for
sir.
it all day?
Oh. We'll be in mourning.
Okay, so for the committee members, the 16th looks good?
16th
Doyle?
is good for me.
Looking it up, I'm gonna say yes until I can verify.
Oh, no, we'll wait on you.
Maybe
16 July.
then logged out.
And I think especially since there's going to be 2 subcommittees, we should, and we don't have to, you guys don't have to do that now, but we should set meetings separate from that meeting in terms of getting together.
And is there any way on the standards of practice meetings that those can also be where people can call in and listen in, or as long as it doesn't form a quorum or anything?
You mean in other inspector committee members?
Well, so I don't, the standards of practice and the education, when those committees meet, can people call in to, or is that not?
No, well, the way
protocol?
the way the go to meeting works is it's we have limited lines, unfortunately, so we can accommodate that. Typically, we don't set up a go to meeting unless the committee members need to call in. It's not something we do for the public, just because it's not the best way, since there are limited lines, for them to interact.
Right.
But
And they can't watch it.
not right now, but we're working on that too. So I know I keep saying that, but there's lots of hoops to jump through. But we can see what we can do in terms of trying to encourage participation.
What date are we referring to?
16.
May.
July.
That's where I was at.
Monday.
It's a Monday,
Monday.
July 16th.
10 o'clock?
Yes, sir, 10.
10 o'clock, where I know a lot of us here have driven 4 or 5 hours to get here. 10 o'clock's a good number.
Yeah.
And I want to say thank you for everyone for coming too. I know that the committee and staff appreciate it because it gives us input. It's nice.
Yeah, we definitely, as a committee, appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day, because we know what it feels like to take have half a day off and not working, but we want to use your time wisely, and we want you to be able to get something out of the meetings and feel like what you're here to communicate to us is listened to. It's important to all of us to have a good.
We want to thank you guys too for what y'all do. And
Thanks.
I know that it's a thankless job, but thank you.
It's It's not thankless, we enjoy it.
They have to go to standards of practice meeting as well at this point.
Tony was just talking about that, yeah, probably enjoy it.
Just send the committee members an email.
I'll send Tony,
With Tony.
because I need to forward some information to him as well for you guys, and we'll go from there.
And I'll be looking at picking a date in June for the education subcommittee.
June for education?
I'll
And
look
this
at-
will be-
And I'll let everybody know, I'll talk to this.
It'll have to be the
subcommittee.
second half of June.
Did you also
Unless you don't
say
want me there.
SOP is also June?
Are you out of town?
I'm out of town, yeah. I'm on
Yes,
vacation.
another vacation.
That's fine.
Another vacation.
Second half of June is fine.
Let's work it around Tony. Okay, so if there isn't anything else from staff, then we are going to adjourn at 11:45.
Thank you, everybody.